The Adventures of Brisco County Jr. lasted a single season. Yet 4 of the people you are about to meet are already gone. One carried into orbit, one saluted at Arlington, and the man who led them just shared news that changes everything. Here is where the cast is now. We begin at number 1. In March of 2026, Bruce Campbell sat down and told his fans something he had never said aloud before. He revealed that doctors had diagnosed him with a form of cancer they called treatable but not curable, and he shared it with the same steady humor that had carried him through 40 years of playing men who refused to quit. He was 68 years old. On this show, he was the Harvard-educated bounty hunter chasing the coming age across the Old West, all jaw and swagger and perfect timing. That role fit because he had already spent a decade building exactly that persona. Born in Royal Oak, Michigan in 1958, he met a teenager named Sam Raimi in high school, and together they shot a horror film in the Tennessee woods that became The Evil Dead. From that low-budget gamble came a career no studio would ever have designed, one built on cult devotion rather than leading man calculation. Campbell married Christine DeVoe in 1983 and had 2 children before that marriage ended in 1989. 2 years later, he wed costume designer Ida Guerin, and they settled far from Hollywood in Jacksonville, Oregon, where he became an ordained minister and a convention fixture who treated strangers like old friends. He kept working, most famously as Sam Axe on Burn Notice and once more as Ash in Ash vs. Evil Dead. Brisco County was written as a hero who could not be killed. Bruce Campbell built a real life on that same stubborn refusal to disappear, and even his cancer announcement carried a working man's shrug rather than a plea for pity. Number 2. Julius Carry was 56 years old when pancreatic cancer took him at his home in Studio City on the 19th of August, 2008. He had kept the illness quiet, the way private men often do, and the news reached fans who still knew him best by a nickname he had shouted in a movie 2 decades earlier. As Lord Bowler, he was the rival bounty hunter who became Brisco's partner, a mountain of a man whose glare filled the screen and whose comic timing kept catching people off guard. Carry had range the industry rarely let him show. Raised in the Lake Meadows neighborhood of Chicago, born in 1952, he joined an acting troupe at 15 and performed Hamlet before he could legally drink. He earned a bachelor's degree in film and television from Loyola Marymount, then a master's in communication arts from the same school, an education few character actors of his era could claim. Most audiences met him first in 1985 when he played Shonuff, the self-proclaimed Shogun of Harlem, in The Last Dragon. That villain followed him everywhere, a blessing in a cage, because casting directors saw the swagger and missed the trained classical actor underneath. Carry married twice, and his second wife was named Naomi. His mother, Helen, served as a minister back in Chicago. When he died, he was cremated, and his ashes were kept by his family rather than laid in any cemetery. So there is no headstone to visit, only the memory his relatives carry with them. Lord Bowler was the man who always had Brisco's back. Julius Carry was the classically trained scholar Hollywood kept casting as muscle, a Shakespearean actor hiding behind a growl, gone far too soon. Third on the list, Kelly Rutherford spent more than $1.5 million fighting to keep her children in the same country as her. And when the courts finished, she had lost both the money and the daily presence of her son and daughter. She filed for bankruptcy in 2013, citing roughly $2 million in debts, most of it legal fees, and the case became one of the most closely watched custody battles in American celebrity history. On this show, she was Dixie Cousins, the saloon singer and con artist who became the hero's great love, sharp of eye and sharper of tongue. Born in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, in 1968, Rutherford trained in New York and Los Angeles before the role, and she went on to bigger fame as Megan on Melrose Place, and most enduringly, as Lily Vander Woodson on Gossip Girl. Her marriage to German businessman Daniel Giersch ended in 2008 while she was pregnant with their second child. After Giersch lost his United States visa, a California court ruled the children should live with him in Europe, and their mother was left crossing oceans for visits. Her son Hermes and daughter Helena grew up in Monaco, far from the woman fighting through every court that would hear her. By 2024, the fury had cooled into something quieter. She began appearing again at fashion shows in Paris, and in 2025, she walked a New York red carpet beside her teenage son, who now towered over her. Dixie Cousins was the woman who always won the room. Kelly Rutherford spent a decade losing the only fight that ever truly mattered to her, and only now, with her children grown, is she winning some of that lost time back. If you were watching this show in real time, tell me in the comments whether you think the courts got Kelly Rutherford's case right. Her story still divides the people who followed it. The next man drilled real recruits before Hollywood ever handed him a script, and he was buried with full military honors. At number 4, R. Lee Ermey almost never became an actor at all, because the role that made him famous was one he was originally hired only to coach. Stanley Kubrick brought him onto Full Metal Jacket as a technical advisor, then watched him tear through a rehearsal and handed him the part of Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, letting him write more than half of his own dialogue. That performance earned a Golden Globe nomination and defined him forever. On this show, he appeared as Brisco County Sr., the lawman father whose murder sets the whole series in motion, and he brought real authority to it because he had lived it. Born in Emporia, Kansas in 1944, he enlisted in the Marine Corps at 17 and served as a drill instructor in San Diego before deploying to Vietnam for 14 months. A medical retirement ended his service in 1972, and he later received an honorary promotion to Gunnery Sergeant, the very rank he had made famous on screen. He married a woman named Neela in 1975, and they raised 4 children together. Ermey spent his later years hosting Mail Call on the History Channel and speaking out for the causes he believed in, never softening the plain edge audiences loved. On the 15th of April, 2018, complications from pneumonia took him in Santa Monica, California, at 74. Months later, on a January morning in 2019, he was laid to rest with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery in Section 82, his ashes carried past the white headstones of the country he had served. The drill sergeant was a character men feared. R. Lee Ermey was a Marine who earned the ground he was buried in, honored not for the movies but for the uniform beneath them. 5th, John Astin has outlived nearly everyone he started with, and at 96 he can look back on a life that stretched from the birth of television to the present day. He still lives in Baltimore, the city where he was born in 1930, the son of a physicist who directed the National Bureau of Standards. On this show, he played Professor Wickwire, the eccentric inventor forever chasing the coming age of machines, a part that let his warmth and comic delicacy shine. Audiences knew that face long before, of course, because Astin was Gomez Addams in the original Addams Family, the deliriously happy husband who kissed his way up Morticia's arm. His personal life carried its own drama. Astin married actress Patty Duke in 1972, and together they raised her sons, including Sean Astin, whom he helped bring up as his own before Sean grew into a star of a later generation. That marriage ended in 1985, one chapter in a long life that also held a first marriage giving him 3 sons, and a third marriage that has lasted since 1989. What truly sets Astin apart is what he did after the cameras slowed. He returned to Johns Hopkins University, his old school, and taught theater there for 2 decades until retiring in 2021, insisting that few major universities kept a working actor in the classroom every single day. Gomez Addams was a man wildly in love with his own life. John Astin turned out to be exactly that in reality, a man of 96 who traded fame for a lectern, and never once seemed to regret it. The next face was one of the most frightening in Hollywood, a gangster in The Untouchables who ended up buried in a tiny Kansas town. Number 6. Billy Drago made a career out of scaring audiences, and he did it with a face so gaunt and eyes so cold that directors lined up to cast him as the man you prayed your hero would defeat. Brian De Palma made him the gangster Frank Nitti in The Untouchables in 1987, and the role sealed his reputation as one of the finest screen villains of his generation. On this show, he played John Bly, the ruthless outlaw at the center of its deepest mysteries, a threat that hung over the entire season. Drago gave Menace a strange elegance. Born Billy Eugene Burroughs in Hugoton, Kansas, in 1945, He took his grandmother's maiden name to stand apart, worked as a stuntman and a radio host, then followed acting all the way to New York. He married actress Silvana Gallardo in 1980, and the marriage lasted until her death in 2012, a partnership of 32 years in an industry where few unions survive that long. Their son, Darren E. Burroughs, became an actor too, best known for Northern Exposure, carrying the family trade into another generation. On the 24th of June, 2019, Drago died in Los Angeles at 73, following complications from a stroke. For all the coastal roles and the big city villains, he went home in the end. He was buried at Hugoton Cemetery in Hugoton, Kansas, the same small town on the state's dusty southwest corner where he had entered the world 73 years earlier. John Bly was the outlaw who terrified a nation of viewers. Billy Drago was a Kansas boy who played monsters for a living and came back to rest exactly where he began. 7th, John Pyper-Ferguson was born to an Olympic swimmer and a record-breaking runner, a bloodline of physical excellence that he traded for a life of playing cult leaders, villains, and broken men across 4 decades of television. Athletic royalty produced a character actor, and one of the most dependable ones in the business. On this show he played Pete Hutter, the philosophizing outlaw with a fixation on his own gun and a habit of dying and coming back, a fan favorite whose oddball menace stole every scene he entered. The writers kept returning to him because audiences could not get enough. Born in Australia in 1964 and raised in Vancouver, he graduated with distinction from the University of Alberta before building a resume that reads like a tour of modern genre television. He was Stinger on Battlestar Galactica, a Tauron billionaire on Caprica, the soldier Tex on The Last Ship, and the doomsday cult leader Bill Cadogan on The 100, a run of memorable roles spanning more than 20 years. Little of his private life has ever reached the press, and he has kept it that way on purpose, letting the work speak while the man stays off stage. At 62, he continues to act, one of those faces every viewer recognizes without ever quite placing the name, the mark of a performer who serves the story rather than his own celebrity. Pete Hutter was the outlaw who refused to stay dead. John Pyper-Ferguson built the opposite of a flameout, a quiet, durable career that has outlasted trends, networks, and most of the stars once billed above him. The next name barely acted at all, yet he may hold the most astonishing final resting place of anyone here, because part of him left the planet entirely. At number 8, Timothy Leary was once called the most dangerous man in America, and the man who said it was President Richard Nixon. Leary was no career actor. He was a Harvard psychologist who became the public face of the psychedelic movement, the man behind the phrase turn on, tune in, drop out, and a figure so controversial that he escaped from prison in 1970 and lived for a time as a fugitive. On this show, he made a single memorable guest appearance as Dr. Milo, a spacey professor of botany, a role whose in-joke every adult in the audience understood at once. Casting him at all was a wink at his real reputation. His life carried deep private grief. Leary married 5 times, and his daughter Susan died by suicide in 1990, a loss that shadowed his final years. When inoperable prostate cancer arrived, he faced it in the open and without visible fear, treating his own dying as one last experiment to be documented and shared. On the 31st of May 1996, he died in Beverly Hills at 75, surrounded by family and friends. Then came the ending nobody else on this list could match. A portion of his cremated ashes was sealed into a small capsule and launched into orbit aboard a rocket in April of 1997, alongside the remains of Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry, circling the Earth for years before burning up on re-entry like a falling star. Dr. Milo was a joke the whole audience was in on. Timothy Leary was a man who spent his life chasing the edge of human experience, and in the end, left the Earth behind for real. Number 9. Christian Clemenson won an Emmy for playing a lawyer with Asperger's syndrome who purred like a cat when he grew nervous. A performance so precise and so humane that it turned a supporting guest role into one of the most memorable characters on television. That 2006 award for Boston Legal came more than a decade after the Western that first put him in front of a wide audience. On this show, he was Socrates Poole, the fussy, anxious attorney forever trying to keep the bounty hunters, within the bounds of the law and forever failing, the buttoned-up center around which the chaos spun. Clemenson took an unlikely road to that role. Raised in Humboldt, Iowa, where his parents ran the local drugstore, he earned a degree from Harvard and then a master's from the Yale School of Drama, one of the most demanding theatrical educations in the country. He carried that training into films most viewers have seen without knowing his name, among them Apollo 13, The Big Lebowski, and United 93, where he played doomed passenger Tom Burnett with quiet devastation. At 68, he keeps working steadily, one of those character actors who never became a household name, but whose face tells any casting director a scene is in careful hands. Socrates Poole was the anxious man always trying to impose order on lawlessness. Christian Clemenson turned that same fussy precision into an Emmy and a career of small, perfect performances that outlasted nearly every leading man of his day. If you are enjoying where these lives ended up, take a moment to subscribe, because this channel follows the whole cast, not only the stars. There is more of this story still to come. 10th on our list, MC Gainey once worked as a mortician's apprentice, handling the dead before he ever made a living playing men who dealt it out on screen. That grim early job became a piece of Hollywood trivia he told with a laugh, the kind of origin fitting for a man who spent his career as cowboys, bikers, and convicts. On this show he played Big Smith, one of the rough men orbiting the outlaw world, a part that used the exact quality that would define him, a face and frame that read as pure trouble. Gainey knew it too, once joking that with a face like his, the lawyer and priest parts were never coming his way. Born in Jackson, Mississippi in 1948, he served in the Army in Turkey, trained at the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, and then built one of the most recognizable character actor careers of his era. He was Swamp Thing in Con Air, Sheriff Roscoe P. Coltrane in the Dukes of Hazzard film, and, most memorably, the menacing Tom Friendly on Lost, a role that introduced him to a whole new generation. He married Kim Novicki in 2002, and at 78 he is still working, still turning up as the heavy in film after film. Big Smith was one more dangerous man in a show already full of them. MC Gainey turned that face, the one he joked would never play a priest, into a 4-decade career, proving that in Hollywood the right kind of trouble can last a lifetime. Number 11. Brandon Maggart is the father of two of the most distinctive voices in American music, and most people who love his daughter's songs have no idea he ever stood in front of a camera. His daughter, Fiona Apple, became one of her generation's most acclaimed singer-songwriters, and his daughter, Maud Maggart, built a celebrated cabaret career, both of them carrying the performing gift he handed down. On this show, he appeared as Professor Coles, part of its rotating world of scientists and schemers, a small entry in a long and varied career. Born in Carthage, Tennessee in 1933, Maggart came up through music and theater, singing with the Knoxville Symphony and earning a Tony Award nomination in 1970 for the Broadway musical Applause. He worked steadily on stage and screen for decades, even headlining the strange cult holiday horror film Christmas Evil, and he collected 4 Cable Award nominations for the series Brothers. He had 5 children with his first wife during a marriage that ran from 1955 to 1971, and later fathered Fiona and Maud with singer Diane McAfee. At 92, he is among the oldest surviving members of this cast, a Broadway man whose greatest legacy may be the music his children make. Professor Coles was a bit player in a Western. Brandon Maggart turned out to be the root of a family tree whose branches reached far deeper into American culture than the show he briefly appeared on ever did. And finally, number 12. Debra Jo Rupp had already been working in television for years when she walked onto the set of this one-season Western, and she would not become truly famous until she was nearly 50, when a role as a warm, slightly frantic Wisconsin mother changed everything. Fame arriving in middle age is rare in Hollywood, and she made the most of it. On this show, she appeared as Ms. Plowright in the 1994 episode Stagecoach, a single guest turn in a career built on exactly those kinds of steady, professional appearances before her breakthrough came. Born in 1951, Rupp spent the 1980s and 1990s as a working character actress, the sort of face audiences recognized without a name attached. Everything shifted in 1998 when she was cast as Kitty Foreman on that 70s show, The Giggling Tender Heart of the Foreman Household, a performance that ran for 8 seasons and earned her lasting affection from viewers. She returned to the role decades later in the sequel series That 90s Show, proof of how deeply audiences still cared. At 75, she continues to act on television and on stage. Ms. Plowright was a face that passed through a single Western episode. Debra Jo Rupp became living proof that the biggest role of a career can arrive after most performers have quit waiting for it. A reminder that in this business the story is never finished until it truly is. Orbit and Arlington, a Kansas cemetery and ashes kept in a family home, Baltimore and Monaco and small-town Oregon, one short-lived Western scattered across the whole map.